The global UN systems have not been that. A lot of the management infrastructure for the Secretary General's office tends to be airplane tickets and speechwriters. You know? I mean, that's funny on one hand, but it's tragic on the other. We're giving the Secretary General speechwriters and airplane tickets. We do not give the Secretary General the state-of-the-art in management software and management concepts. You take a look at senior large banks, they got themselves a little situation room. You take a look at large energy companies, they got a little situation room. You look at NASA, it's got a little situation room. What's the situation room for the Secretary General of the UN? It looks like a lawyer's office. So, I'm very pleased to say that there is some progress on this, and I'd like us all to think about how we can all chip in to help. I've talked with the Assistant Secretary General of the UN of Information Technology about upgrading the Secretary General's office and the Secretariat to a senior, state-of-the-art management system in the way that we would talk about it. And he is delighted. He happens to have a PhD in executive information, strategic executive information systems, so he's qualified. He's also Korean, so he can talk to the Secretary General back channel, no problem. The Assistant Secretary General for Policy and Planning has also agreed to this direction. But as we all know, you can have everybody agreeing, but nothing happens. The UN is a membership organization, so your countries have to say, do it. Hint, your countries have to say, do it. So the Secretariat has agreed internally, we ought to make this shift. But a shift like this doesn't happen until a couple of countries say, do it. This is a membership club. So part of the idea is to have each country designate its own future strategy unit, whatever you want to call it, to participate in an intranet. To begin very modestly with what are you doing, what methods you're using, what studies you're doing, sort of updating. And then slowly but surely start to evolve a collective intelligence. Now, when I suggested this, they said a collective intelligence for the UN is too complex, we can't do that. Not to start with anyway. So we would start with climate change. Start with climate change. What do you leave out of climate change? There's values, there's economics, there's engineering, there's climatology. So I said, okay, we'll narrow it to that small topic. Climate change. So the theory is that we will start with a climate change situation room, collective intelligence with the Secretary General's office. We'll see how it goes. It still does need a little bit of external lobbying, but this could be the beginning of an infrastructure for the futurists of the world to feed into. We know all of our brains got all this information in it, but how do we share it? We share it with professional papers and speeches like this. Pretty damned inefficient. You know, we got a little Wikipedia, but it would be nice to upgrade the Wikipedia for a collective intelligence for the planet the futurists could participate in. Okay, some of these ideas in the State of the Future, obviously I won't go through all of them. I handed out the propaganda, so you can get it if you want to. This is what it looks like. End of commercial. Now, the framework. This has come to be through a long, torturous process, which I won't bore you with because I don't have enough time to bore you with it. So I'll very quickly click through these and make some comments. How can sustainable development be achieved by all within the context of global warming? By the way, as you know, there's about 387 parts per billion at the last count of CO2 in our atmosphere. And we already have all the problems that you're aware of. So when I hear the European Union and others saying, well, we're going to level off at 550 parts per million, I say that's a sham. We should not accept that. We already are not making it with 370. Why the hell are we going to make it at 550? And someone said, well, we'll go down to 450. No. We have to be serious. If we're really going to address the situation, we've got to get it down to at least 350. And says, well, that's not economically impossible. I said, going toward Venus is not economically desirable either. We all know what Venus is. You take the distance from the sun to Venus, the from the sun to Earth, sun to Mars. If you just look at the distance, it's not good enough. Venus is a greenhouse effect. That's the direction we're moving into. Not tomorrow morning, but that's the long-term direction. So the faster we grow up as a species and say, we've got to get down to that lower thing, the better. And we should not compromise. You know, it's not our job. We're not politicians. We're advisors. We should just tell the truth. You can't accept a 550. You can't accept 450. You're at the best 350. Clean water without conflict. It's always an issue. I'll get back into that a little bit later if I've got the time. But our colleague Rusan Wang in China, when they did the water scenarios 5 or 6 years ago, they had 3 scenarios: best, worst, and middle case scenarios for China. And the best case scenario showed that for the next 15 to 17 years, the situation would get worse before it starts to come up, which means you're looking at 20 years before you actually get as bad as you are today. And as you know, in China, independent of the Three Gorges Dam, there's been forced migration because the water's not there, the river didn't come back, and the pollution was too high. So there's already been migration. And that's before you get the cacophony of going. Because as you know, when water tables go down, all of a sudden you have things simultaneously happening. Because people got to move. Water you got to have. And so India, I just don't have the data for, but that's 40% of humanity there. It's really a nightmare coming up. And there's new ways of doing water. For those of the engineers in the group, think about the idea of pressurization on salt water. It's not been developed at all. Think about how you can force wind on a coastline to a point to get enough pressure on that salt water coming up in a pipe that sprays it out in a jet. Salt water falls out first, or salt falls out first, water falls out second. Whole area has not been done, and it doesn't require as much energy. So there's a lot to be done in this area. How can the resources and population be brought into balance? One of the issues that's not being well understood here is you've got a bell curve of population going like this. It's going up to 2050, but then it goes down very fast, unless there's major breakthroughs, which I think there will be, in longevity. But assuming no major breakthroughs, which the UN does, it could go from 9-point-something, 9.1, 9.2 billion people, down to as low as 5.5 billion, which would mean that by the end of the century, the vast majority of everybody is on retirement. Well, you can't run an economy like that. You can't have the vast majority of every people on social welfare and social retirement. It's not going to work. So we have to really rethink about how do we take retired people who have figured out how to make a living on the internet and have them teach the next generation. Because the idea of retiring at 65 is a fraud. I mean, it's ridiculous. We're living a lot longer. We're going into a knowledge economy, so therefore it's more important. If you're a coal miner, you don't want to be 65. It makes sense. It doesn't make sense today. You know, and people say, well, we got the social contract. You know, you've got to get retirement at 65, what are the ages? Sorry, folks, it won't work. We have to grow up as a species to say, all right, we're living longer. We're moving into a knowledge economy. We have the internet infrastructure. Let's get with it. How can genuine democracy emerge from authoritarian regimes? The trends were going great for a bunch of years, but the last 5 years they've been going down. Yes, there are more electoral democracies, but we all know that election doesn't always tell you the truth. There's also a cultural democracy. There's also press freedoms, and those press freedoms have been going down recently. How can policymaking be more sensitive to global long-term perspectives? That's our job. How can the global convergence of information and communications technologies work for everyone? The forecasts in this area have consistently understated what has actually occurred. The only forecast on telecommunications and third world and second world and first world and all those various worlds I've ever seen wrong was Negroponte of MIT's forecast on how many capitals by the year 2000 in Africa would have internet access. That's the only overstatement I have ever seen since 1973, and I was involved in the forecast from 73 on. We have constantly understated what was possible, which means that we constantly understate what we think we could do as a policy. Imagine taking the bottom 1 or 2 billion people of the planet and figuring out how do you get handheld computer capability or access to such a people with a different economic model. The old economic model is you bought a computer terminal. All right? Well, the old economic model in the beginning of internet was you bought an email. How many people pay for their email address? Nobody. You know? Because there's other reasons, other ways that you pay for it. We're going to have to figure out a new model, how you get the bottom third of the world into the game. And we should just take it on as a challenge. And there's an awful lot of progress in this area. The progress in this area is faster than people are realizing.